This is JCT TV. This is Bible study for the 21st century. You know, friends, it's always a pleasure for me to come your way. I take it as a great honor, really, because I know that you have lots of channels to select from, and you can spend your time watching whatever you want, or on your computer, on the internet, whatever. So coming your way to me is a real privilege, and I really, really appreciate it. Today we continue focusing on WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows, in our interview segment with Rita Guild, who works for us, and then our Bible study. Hang in there with us.
JCT TV is the official voice of WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows. Jim Cantelon is the founder of WOW and has been ministering to orphans and widows in distress for 18 years. WOW's focus is home-based care for the dying. The horizon is vast, with thousands of the least of these in Africa and India. WOW depends on your generous support. To do so, simply contact us by phone, mail, or online.
As I start at the top, friends, these are a special series of programs this month as I'm giving you some insights into the work we're doing in Africa and also in India with Working for Orphans and Widows, federal charity that my wife and I planted 20 years ago. And we've been faithfully just working away at it year after year after year, and it's really amazing how it's developing. And our focus is essentially on home-based care for those who are dying. Orphans and widows are a priority. And believe me, it never ceases to challenge, humble, eviscerate, and stir us with the profound need that we have to visit orphans and widows in their distress. A key player in WOW's ministry for 14 years has been Rita Guild. I mentioned her off the top as well. Rita was with me last program. She's with me this program and for the next few programs. Rita, let's take a look at a picture here. Now, what do you see there? You're looking at this picture for the first time. What do you see?
Home-based care worker. I see her bag, her medical bag of primary healthcare items in there, and a woman in deep distress.
Yeah.
She's not well.
You can just see her face and her head there in the blankets. 29 years old, HIV positive, full-blown AIDS, with a few other very serious opportunistic infections. Too weak to lift her head off that pillow with 3 little kids. And you know this is true, Rita. Again and again, they tell you this. The volunteers will shake their heads, but it's sort of de rigueur for them. They had a husband, but when she became HIV positive, he left. Yep. Or he died, one or the other. He left or he died. And here they are, and you know, she is so ill, and those little kids, I didn't take a picture of her children at that point because they weren't there. But this is the reality.
You know, without that home-based care worker that's there, I've been to some homes taken there by home-based care workers. And the primary caregiver for a woman like that would have been her 10-year-old.
Yeah.
Who will care for her mom until the mom passes away, and then that 10-year-old will be the caregiver of whoever's left in the house, and she's now the mom.
You know, I've seen it so many times. Like when Kathy and I were there just a few weeks ago, we saw it again. You'll see a 6 or a 7-year-old girl usually with a baby strapped to her back, and she's out there walking around playing whatever, and this baby is with her because there's no one else to look after the baby. Now, you might wonder about this next picture, but I had to show you this. In every African village, there is 1 or 2 village chickens. And you know, I'm showing this picture for a purpose. Rita, this has happened to you. It's happened to Kathy and I many times. They're so honored that we've come, that they've prepared for our arrival, and they've taken one of these village chickens, skinny, scrawny little chicken, who's scratching out a living there just out of that dust. And they'll cook it, and it's as hard as eating, you know, boiled leather. But, you know, you dutifully apply your teeth to this offering because to them, this is their way of honoring you. They're so appreciative.
It's very humbling because the people that we meet often tell us they eat chicken meat, usually chicken is the cheapest, twice a year.
Twice a year, right.
And every time we come, they want to host you. They want to feed you the chicken that they're giving up. And you're happy to eat it.
Yeah. And it's humbling to eat it. And you know, you daren't leave anything on the bones because when they have access to the village chicken, they do everything but eat the bones. I mean, there's no grizzle, there's no tendons, there's nothing left on those bones. They suck them dry. And again, I mean, how easy is it for us, friends, just to go up to the restaurant, right? In fact, more and more of us are eating out 40% of the time. We don't think twice about it. And we go to the grocery store and buy $100 worth of groceries or whatever. It's just what we do. With these precious people, food is at such a premium. Now, speaking of food, take a look at this pic. This is a way of storing maize. Now, this is one in a village where they had a little bit of a field, and they're growing maize corn. Maize corn is a very rough kind of corn that they grind into something called, it's flour, basically. It's corn flour. And they make something called nchima, which is like, what would it be like? Like cream of wheat? It'd be like cream of wheat.
Very thick. You can mold it with your hand, and it's a thick, tasteless kind of porridge that they use as their base. Yeah.
And I'm not sure how much nutrition it has, but it at least fills the tummy for at the time being.
Very little nutrition. It's just corn.
Yeah.
So it's very little, and oftentimes that's by far the majority of what they eat. If anything else, they're lucky to add greens or, like I said, meat.
Yeah. You know, it's not my interest here, friends, to suggest for a minute that any of us should feel guilty about what's happening in most of the world. You know, 2/3 of the world live on less than $2 a day. It's counterproductive to feel guilty about it. But as the old adage says, it's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. And so we're trying to light a candle and, you know, in our own small way to make a difference in the lives of maybe several hundreds, a few thousands of people with your help. But I just have to stress again and again that, you know, these are people for whom Christ died. These are people who have souls. These are people who have brains. These are people who have just as much intelligence as you or I have. It's just they've not had the opportunity for education, for nutrition, for whatever. Now here's a shot, and this is an interesting picture. This is a fellow who is very ill. He's got tuberculosis as well as being HIV positive, but he's just in the early stages. He looks a little healthier than many, but I like this pic because of what you can see in his eyes, his facial expression. He is a young man who came to the Lord through the ministry of one of our home-based care volunteers. And even though he's dying, he has hope. And again, Rita, I would hear this from, and I'm sure you have too, from these people who are in such desperate straits. Their great love for the Lord and their great appreciation for the Lord's people who come and help them in the smallest way. It's actually, sometimes I wonder who's blessing whom here. We're there to bless them. They bless me with their faith in the face of all kinds of difficulty.
When you walk through a slum, when you walk through anywhere, actually, any of the villages that we work in, you typically see two kinds of people. In particular, one, a dead man walking. You can see in their eyes that there's nothing there. Yeah. And the other is somebody who has, like this gentleman that we just saw, a light in his eyes, and he has hope. Even though he's dying, he still has hope.
Yeah. See, the thing is, and I don't sound trite to say it, but we're all dying. We're all dying. None of us is going to live forever in this flesh, on this planet, in space and time. So sooner or later, our day will come. What is humbling and stirring about these people with whom we are working in our home-based care ministry with WOW is that they know that the end is near, and they're preparing. Sometimes, this is more the women than the guys who'll do this, but they'll start to sing, even while they're lying there in their distraught situation, about their hope of heaven, their hope of healing on the other side, their love for the Lord. And I know that you like Kath and I, we get so moved. I mean, I find myself sometimes just having to go out and choke the tears away. It's so moving. Here's a shot where just a few days ago, I was speaking to, you can't see the full crowd there, but there were about 1,500 people sitting on the ground in the dust, in the sun. And about 4/5 of them are widows. And they're all on the receiving end of WOW's ministry as it's supported by you, the viewer, translating those donor dollars into life-giving and hope-giving things like cooking oil and maize meal and medications, but more than that, visitation from godly volunteers who are leading them to faith in Christ. But what strikes me about this, and this is why I included this picture, the guy on the right is my interpreter. Edward's his name. What an outstanding young man he is. But these people will sit there in the boiling sun for an hour and a half, 2 hours, as long as you will give them. And they always feel when I'm done that I should have given them more time. Because some of them there have walked 4 and 5, 6 kilometers just to be there for this moment. And they just want to hear from us. Many of them, they've heard about America, they've heard about Canada. They're not too sure where those countries are, but they're sure glad we're there. And it strikes me as, again, from my perspective, not just humbling, but almost leveling. I feel so inadequate ministering to these people. Now look at this shot.
This is what we do.
This is what we do. There, I have my hand on the head of a little baby who has just been born about 3 weeks previous, looking malnourished already, a very undernourished mother, widow, of course. Her husband abandoned her. But she wanted me to bless her child and to dedicate her child to the Lord. I can't tell you how tough it is to do this, friends. I mean, I bow and I pray and I weep. And it takes a lot of control, actually, sometimes for me, just not to choke up while I'm praying. But there's a pic of human need, if I've ever seen one. There's an orphan and a widow. And hopefully my hand represents your hand, friends. We try together with WOW to be the hands and feet of Jesus, reaching out to the very desperate, the neediest of the needy, the orphan and the widow, to whom the Lord has called us to be a father to the fatherless and defender of widows. And by God's grace, we do what we do. Okay, enough pics. Rita will be back with me next program and some more pictures of our work with working for Orphans and Widows. Just keep in mind, friends, that JCT, Jim Cantelon today, is the official voice of WOW. This is why we're bringing it to you. We just want you to know what we're talking about when you see those little ads and when you hear me mentioning WOW from time to time. This is a ministry that is comprehensive, not just Bible teaching, but practicing, if you will, the justice-seeking of Jesus with the very least of these.
Jim Cantelon Today is a program dedicated to the teaching of the good news of Jesus Christ. This all through the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. JCT also brings to you encouraging testimonies and stories from Christian leaders all over the globe. If this program has added value to your life, would you please consider becoming a partner? To do so, simply contact us by phone, mail, or online.
Mark 1, chapter 21, then they went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. I began describing Capernaum to you last time. Let me just finish with this. There is a beautiful synagogue, the ruins of a synagogue in Capernaum, and when you go in to the Capernaum compound, if you will, it's prominent. It's sort of central to everything else. It's beautiful. It's made out of white limestone. There's several pillars still standing, and it's beautifully decorated. At the same time, it has a kind of a stark simplicity to it. But what you have to remember when you're looking at this beautiful ruins, that the foundation is not white limestone at all. The foundation are chiseled kind of square black rocks that form the foundation. Those go back to Jesus' time. And why the black rocks? Because it's what's called basalt rock, which means it's volcanic rock. And the belief is that thousands of years ago, Mount Hermon, which is about, from Capernaum, as the crow flies, I'd say maybe 50 kilometers, 30 miles north up to Mount Hermon, it was a volcano. And there were lots of, eruptions over the centuries. And that, of course, formed this black basalt rock, and erosion and so on being what it is. You eventually have boulders and cliff faces and so on. And, over time, builders would quarry some of this basalt rock out of those cliff faces and also shape some of the boulders into building-sized rocks. And so the foundation of the Capernaum synagogue is black. But what you see there now goes back to about the 2nd century, white limestone ruins. But it gives you a real good idea that the synagogue was probably 2 stories, an upper story and a lower story, and probably the upper story was for the women, because in Orthodox Jewish synagogue services in Jesus' time, and to this day in Orthodox synagogues, the women and the men do not share the same space. The women are either up in a kind of a balcony, or they're behind barriers or curtains around the edge of the synagogue, because only the men participate. The synagogue itself would have been the center of life for Capernaum, even though it was a big trading center, and the whole Gentile world was coming through there on the trade routes. In terms of the Jewish life of Capernaum, with all the Gentiles around it, it was still predominantly Jewish in its culture. The synagogue would be right in the bullseye of anything and everything that happened in Capernaum of value and of importance. So the synagogue was there. Now, it's interesting here. Let me get my pencil. It says he entered the synagogue and taught, okay? Jesus generally was teaching, or he was performing miracles. And those miracles usually were comprised of healing the sick and delivering those who were demonically possessed, evil spirits. His teaching was central to his ministry, and even though the average person, and by the way, in Hebrew, let me write it in English letters here. I'll do it in caps. Am, which means people, and then haaretz, haaretz. It means people of the land, and this was the everyday citizenship of Israel. Most of them illiterate, many of them not at all aware of much of the world outside of, say, a 30-kilometer range. very influenced by the religious culture of their time and their history, their background. Their rabbis, the Pharisees, the scribes, kept them well apprised of what was expected of them from their Jewish cultural / religious worldview. But they were fascinated because Jesus was teaching them stuff they'd never heard before. He was teaching them about the kingdom of heaven. When you do a kind of a reading and analysis of most of the parables in the Gospels, most of them, I would say 90%, if not more, are about the meaning of the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. And they were hearing stuff from Jesus they hadn't heard from the other rabbis. They were absolutely fascinated by this. And he wasn't easily dismissed as some kind of a, wild-eyed, foaming at the mouth, standalone, self-appointed prophet. He spoke with authority. See that word there? He taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Now, the scribes were legal experts. And by legal, I'm referring to the law of Moses. There's 613 laws of Moses. We usually think of the laws of Moses just in terms of 10 commandments. The 10 commandments are only a very small part of the law of Moses. And it wasn't just the law of Moses, but then over the centuries, the religious authorities they'd built a wall around the law, meaning that they were so concerned about people transgressing the law, they developed subsets of law, so that the subsets of law would keep you from actually getting beyond the fence of their subsets into the law itself. So they were protecting the law and protecting you from transgressing the law, so you had these man-made rules, if you will, around the law that would keep you at arm's length from actually transgressing the law itself. So it was more than the 1,613 laws of Moses. It was all these subsets, these man-made or traditions of the elders, as they're called. The scribes were experts in those things. Okay, so the scribes were constantly teaching the people too, but their teaching was so different from Jesus. Jesus would just simply make a statement. The scribes and the rabbis would make a statement, and then they would support it like they were writing an academic paper with quotes and references to other rabbis who'd gone before them and other scribes who'd gone before them. So Rabbi Hillel said this, Rabbi Akiva said this, Rabbi so-and-so said that. And they would use that as the authority for what they're now saying to the people. So they're not speaking with their own authority, they're speaking with the authority of teachers who have preceded them. This is not Jesus. Jesus spoke as if he was the only one ever to have spoken. And he spoke with such power and such authority that the people listened to him. And they recognized the authority of his words, and they were impressed with the authority of his words, and they responded to the authority of his words, okay? Now, the authority thing is going to come up again. Let's move on. There was a man in their synagogue with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, saying, "Let us alone. What have we to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? Did you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet, come out of him." And when the unclean spirit had convulsed him and cried out with a loud voice, he came out of him. Now, what's going on here? A demoniac is in the synagogue service, someone who is possessed by an evil spirit. And this evil spirit has to speak. Now, follow me here. I've been a pastor for 50 years. I've dealt with a lot of people over the years who are dealing with spiritual oppression and possession issues. I'm not one of these weird guys who's a demon hunter by any stretch. The last thing I want to do is deal with someone who has that kind of an issue. But from time to time, it happens. I found that, these unclean spirits are compulsive, exhibitionists. They have to expose themselves. They have to come out and acknowledge that they're there, especially if you approach them in the name of Jesus. I'm not talking weird magic here. I'm just talking about my experience. And this is what's happening here. Jesus is there in the synagogue. This evil spirit cannot be silent. And so he shouts out at Jesus, what have we to do with you? Why are you here? Have you come to destroy us? Okay? What I find interesting here, that the very first confession of Jesus' status as the Holy One of God comes not from a disciple, not from some well-meaning follower of Jesus, but comes from a resident of the spirit underworld. This is something that transcends the Enlightenment, several hundred years ago. This is something that transcends any skillful apologist in biblical doctrine. This transcends anything that any of us have ever experienced. This is a word of witness from the spirit world who see the realities of the spirit world, and they see Jesus as he truly is, the Holy One of God. It's amazing to me, For 3 years, Jesus spent this time with the disciples, with multitude, thousands and thousands of followers, and went through all the passion of Calvary and his death and resurrection. And even after his resurrection, some of the disciples doubting that he's really risen from the dead. All of this stuff. The spirit world were under no illusions. They knew exactly who Jesus was. And when the voice of darkness says this is who Jesus is, then we better take notice.
The Bible tells us that true religion is visiting orphans and widows in their distress. The Bible also says that God is a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows. Heaven's core values for mankind begin with God's heart for the least of these. When you support WOW, you're in the sweet spot of God's heart for the poor. Yes, we're only a small player in this great drama, but at least we're on the field. Please give generously.
When this evil spirit in Capernaum says, we know who you are, Jesus. You're the Holy One of God. And they didn't like him. They wanted him to go away. They were afraid of him. That confession, if you will, of who Jesus is as relevant today as it was then. Jesus, of course, and all of heaven is not bound by space and time. There's absolutely not even a blink of an eye between now and then relative to the heavenly view of things. Jesus is still the Holy One of God. And that's why, I'm so keen for you to hear about Jesus. It's not just my mission. I mean, any Christian spokesman, any Christian communicator has got to focus on Jesus. Who is Jesus, and what does he expect of us, and what do we do about him? He came to the world to save sinners. I'm a sinner. He must have come to save me. And the prayer that will be forever answered by heaven is, God be merciful to me, a sinner.